I think my microphone is on this time, so let's go on to padding. Now, where were we? The space between the contents of a box and the borders of a box is known as padding. Padding is like the space between a picture and the frame surrounding it. So let me just go into the developer tools and I can show you what they're talking about. Inside, when you can inspect the element, each of the elements, and they can tell you on this HTML web page the size of each padding border margin. Right now we're looking at the whole window and it has this size of 994 by 866. And when they're talking about the padding, they're talking about the area between the border and the contents of the box. Alright? Now, so for this rule set, you can modify the space with the padding property. This is the padding property, and that's the padding value. The code in this example put 10 pixels of a space between the content of the paragraph, the text, and the borders on all four sides. The padding property is often used to expand the background color and make the content look less cramped. If you want to be more specific about the amount of padding on each side of the box content, you can use the following properties: padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. Each property affects the padding on only one side of box's content, giving you more flexibility in customization. So they chose to add padding only to the bottom of the box. In the example above, only the bottom side of the paragraph's content will have a padding of 10 pixels. Inside the dot navigation li rule set, create a declaration using the padding property with the value of 20px. So that's this rule set, and they want us to add padding of 20 pixels. Let's check that. And we are correct. That is what we declared. Simple. Look at the red box at the bottom of the web page. Set the .share A elements to have 14 pixels of padding and style.cs. So let's look for the .share A rule set. The .share class targeting the A, and they want us to add a padding and style.css. Observe how the red boxes at the bottom of the pages change. Oh no, it did not change. You know what? What was I even doing? That I typed in the name of the file instead of the padding value I wanted, which is 14 pixels. Yay! Now my head is screwed on. Set the top and bottom padding of H2 elements to 20 pixels and set the left. Oh, we're still talking about the same thing? Oh no, the H2 tag, which is over here. Okay, so we want to set the top and bottom padding of H2 elements to 30 pixels. So we can say padding top is 20 pixels and also the padding bottom is also 20 pixels, and what the left and right ones are 30 pixels. Yay, I'm an engineer. Ha 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 ha. Anyways, so now that we completed that, we can move on to the next one, the padding shorthand. Padding shorthand. Oh yes, I knew there was a shortcut. Another implementation of the padding property lets you specify exactly how much padding there should be on each side of the content in a single declaration. A declaration that uses multiple properties as values is known as a shorthand property. Padding shorthand lets you specify all the padding properties as values on a single line. You can specify these properties in a few different ways. For values in the example above, the for values 6, 11, 4, 9 pixels correspond to the amount of padding on each side. In a clockwise rotation, top, right, bottom, left in order. It specifies the padding top value 6px, the padding right value 11px, the padding bottom value 4px, and the padding left value 9px of the content. That's when there are 4 values. When there are 3 values, if the left and right side of the contents can be equal, the padding shorthand property allows for 3 values to be specified. The first value sets the padding top value 4 pixels, and the second value sets the padding left and right values for 10 pixels, and the third value sets the padding bottom to 20 pixels. And when there are 2 values, you can target 2 sides with 1 value. Each of these target 2 sides, and if the top and bottom sides can be equal, and the left and right side can be equal, you can specify 2 values. The first value sets the padding top and the padding bottom values. The first value sets the padding top and padding bottom values to 5 pixels, and the second value sets the padding left and padding right values 10 pixels. So if you change the individual padding declarations on H2 selectors, something we did before, so instead of this, we can write it in shorthand to use the padding shorthand with 2 values. Keep the padding for the top and bottom at 20 pixels. The first one is for top and bottom, which is 20 pixels. And the value for the left and right padding at 30 pixels. Oh no, what happened? Oh no, what happened? Okay, it's saved here. It just timed out for some reason. And let's see. Wow, that looks good. This looks really good. Anyways, the next step. Using 2 values for the padding property, set padding of p elements to 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right. Set the padding of p elements to 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 20 pixels on the left and right. Just like before, the first value of padding property will set the top and bottom, and the second value will set the left and right. So they want us to set it for the p element, and where is that p element? Right here, top and bottom. So we can just copy paste because we want the top and bottom to also be 20, the left and right. No, this time we want 10 to be on top and bottom and 20 pixels to be on the left and right. So let's check that out. All right. Now for the margin. Yeah. Oh, there's going to be a margin and a margin shorthand. Let's go up to margin collapse. Okay, so for the margin, so far you learned about the following components of the box model. And what were they? That's right, the content, borders, and padding. The fourth and final component of the box model is margin. Margin refers to the space directly outside of the box. The margin property is used to specify the size of this space. So let me go ahead and show you, if you don't remember, using our developer tools. And scroll all the way down to the bottom. The margin is right there. Let's see if there's any element on this page that has a margin. Nothing has a margin. Oh, this has a margin, that's right. This orange part is a margin, so when you click on it, you can see that there's a margin of size 16. Anyways, margin refers to the space directly outside the box. Outside of the box, the margin property is used to specify the size of this space. So that's outside of the border and the padding, not the contents directly. I mean, if there is no border and padding, then it will be directly outside. So the code in this example above will place 20 pixels of space on the outside of paragraphs box on all four sides. This means that other HTML elements on this page cannot come within 20 pixels of the paragraph's border. So before, when you see that this had a margin right here, we cannot put this next paragraph directly next to that first paragraph because there's a margin that is set. If you want to be more specific about the amount of margin on each side of the box, you can use the following properties. Just like how they did it with the padding, there's top, right, bottom, left. Each property affects the margin on only one side of the box, providing more flexibility in customization. In this example above, only the right side of the paragraphs box will have a margin of 15 pixels. It's common to see margin values used for a specific side of an element. Set the top margin of P elements to 60 pixels. The P element, we were just changing that before. Here it is. I'm going to put it right under padding. 60 pixels. Oh wait, we are just targeting the top, so now let's look at the three red boxes at the bottom of the web page. These elements are anchor elements of class .share. Anchor elements of class .share. Set these .share A elements to have a margin. Let me put it right underneath padding. Of 10 pixels. Did they specify a side, or are they saying on all sides? We'll see. And it works. Now it's even more separated and it looks really good. Now, since padding has a shorthand, margin would also have a shorthand. What if you don't want equal margins on all four sides of the box and don't have time to separate properties for each side? You're in luck! Margin can be written as a shorthand property as well. The shorthand syntax for margins is the same as padding. So if you're feeling comfortable with that, skip to the instructions. Otherwise, read on to learn how to use margin shorthand. You can pause the video if you want to read on your own. We basically went over this. 4 values corresponding to the thickness on each side in clockwise rotation. Top, right, bottom, left. For the 3 values is top, the middle one is both right and left, and the last one is the bottom. For 2 values, the first one is top, bottom, the second one is left, right. So now let's follow the instructions. Set H2 top and bottom margin to 30 pixels and the left and right margins to 20 pixels. So that means we can use the shorthand with two values, since top and bottom margins are 30 pixels and left and right are 20 pixels. Let's check that out. Oh, I forgot what they were talking about, but it made some change. Now let's move on to the next one. Auto. The auto keyword. The margin property also lets you censor content. However, you must follow a few syntax requirements. Take a look at the following example. Take a look at the following example. In the example above, margin, I hope my microphone is on. In the example above, margin 0 auto will center the divs in their containing elements. The 0 sets the top and bottom margin to 0 pixels. The auto value instructs the browser to adjust the left and right margins until the element is centered within its containing element. The 0 sets the top and bottom margin to 0 pixels. The auto value instructs the browser to adjust the left and right margins until the element is centered within its containing elements. This was hard to understand, to be honest. We'll center the divs in the containing elements, okay? Okay. So if this thing is inside a container, it will be centered if we use 0 auto. The 0 sets the top and bottom margin to 0 pixels. The auto value instructs the browser to adjust the left and right margins until the element is centered within its containing elements. That makes sense because to center things, you need to make sure the left and right side of this element are equal, right? And if auto can help us calculate the width of the left and right to help us center this element. In order to center an element, a width must be set for that element. Otherwise, the width of the div will automatically be set to the full width of its containing element, like the body, for example. It's not possible to center an element that takes up the full width of the page, since the width of the page can change due to display and/or browser window size. In the example above, the width of the div is set to 400 pixels, which is less than the width of most screens. This will cause the div to center within a containing element that is greater than 400 pixels wide. In the example above, the width of the div is set to 400 pixels, which is less than the width of most screens. This will cause the div to center within a containing element that is greater than 400 pixels wide. Set the width of the .pollCode class elements to 350 pixels. So we have to find the .pollCode class, which is here. It's empty. And set the width to 350 pixels. In one line, set the vertical top and bottom margins of the .pollCode class to 0 and the horizontal left and right margins to auto. In one line, set the vertical top and bottom margin of the pole code class. Okay, so it's the top and bottom to 0 and the horizontal left and right margins to auto. Now set the vertical margins of the ID main row set. Set the vertical margins of the ID main element to 0 and the horizontal margins to auto. So just like before. I think they were already centered already, or were they not? But the point is that it centered it. Alright. So what does it mean for margin collapse? Margin collapse. As you have seen, padding is space added inside an element's border. While margin is space added outside an element's border. Lots of people will have padding and margin confused. But margin is outside, padding is on the inside of the border. One additional difference is that top and bottom margins, also called vertical margins, collapse, while top and bottom padding does not. I don't know what that means. Let's read on. Horizontal margins left and right, like padding, are always displayed and added together. For example, if two divs with IDs div1 and div2 are next to each other, they will be as far apart as the sum of their adjacent margins. Okay, so let's see where div1 is. Oh no, there's no div1 shown in the picture to the right. They're just talking about an example. They will be as far apart as the sum of their adjacent margin. So that means if one of them has a margin on their right with 20 pixels, it will be 20 pixels away from the other one, from the second div. But if this div has a margin on their left, then it will be the difference between those two will be 40 pixels. In this example, the space between the image 1 and image 2 borders is 40 pixels. The right margin of image 1, 20 pixels, and the left margin of image 2, 20 pixels, add to make a total margin of 40 pixels. So you can imagine element A as div 1 and element B as div 2, and the right margin of div 1 will be 20 pixels here, and the left margin of div 2 will be 20 pixels on its left, and together it will be 40 pixels. Requires math. So unlike horizontal margins, vertical margins do not add. Instead, the larger of the two vertical margins sets the difference between adjacent elements. Unlike horizontal margins, vertical margins do not add. Also, horizontal add, but vertical margins do not add. Instead, the larger of the two vertical margins sets the difference between adjacent elements. What? In this example, the vertical margin between the image 1 and the image 2 elements is 30 pixels. Although the sum of the margin is 50 pixels, the margin collapses so that the spacing is only dependent on the image 1 bottom margin. This may be helpful to think of collapsing vertical margin as a short person trying to push a taller person. The tall person has longer arms and can easily push the short person, while the person with short arms cannot reach the person with long arms. So they have a space, they're separated by a space of 30 elements. So I'm guessing it's always the bigger one, since this is the taller, this would be the taller person with longer arms, and this would be the shorter person with shorter arms. Study the graphic displayed to the right. Elements A and B have 20 pixels of horizontal margin. The sum of each element's margin. Yep, they add up together because they both have a margin of 10 pixels around each side for both elements. So adding them together, since the horizontal margins add up, it will be 20 pixels. But for the vertical margins, elements A and C have 30 pixels of vertical margins. No, element C has 30 pixels. And since this one is bigger than the 10 pixel margin of element A, the space separating these two elements would be 30 pixels. Yes, so it's always the maximum of these two margins. It's not always the margin of the top one, the margin coming from the top element, or the margin coming from the bottom element. It's the maximum margin of the two. So what is the reason behind the collapsing on horizontal margin and not vertical? That's a good question. I should drop the link into the description below for you to go read this on your own if you want. But let me also go over block elements in CSS treats the vertical and horizontal directions differently. A block element takes up a whole row or horizontal end to end. Anyways, let's move on to, let's go over these in the next video.